Thank you for listening to another episode of the Vincast, Australia's premier wine podcast. I'd like to take this opportunity to recommend another fantastic podcast, an even better wine podcast than my own. It's called I'll Drink to That. Hosted by Levi Dalton and show warm-ups by Aaron Scala. Levi hosts the podcast out of his apartment, basically, in New York City, and he sits down with some of the most incredible people in the wine industry. Some amazing winemakers, sommeliers, wine merchants, and wine writers. These are real big hitters in the world of wine, from Jancis Robinson to Albert de Villaine. He has got some incredibly inspirational people, and he does a fantastic job of researching, and his interview technique really does get a lot out of the guests. So you do get a much deeper understanding about their background and their philosophies about wine. So particularly if you are in the wine industry and you want a more technical, in-depth podcast about wine, I do highly recommend checking out I'll Drink to That. You'll be able to find it on Google, but you can also find it on iTunes. And if you do enjoy it, please leave a rating and a review for Levi and let him know that I recommended it. On episode 107 of the Vincast, I chat with the wine detective herself, Sarah Ahmed, a wine writer based in the UK that specialises in the wines of Australia and Portugal. Hello there, Vincasters. Welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and I am sitting in lovely, sunny Mildura at the moment. I'm here for the Australian Alternative Varieties Wine Show, and the first day of stewarding was yesterday, and it was all just setting up, going through and organising all the wines for the week. So I'm really excited to be able to help out, but also get involved as the fellow for the year, and see and taste lots, ask lots of questions. And I'm also going to be sitting down with a number of people whilst I'm here, including my guest on this week's episode. Her name is Sarah Ahmed. She is otherwise known as the Wine Detective, and she is one of the foremost authorities on Australian and Portuguese wine in the UK, travels quite extensively, and writes for a number of different publications. So she's the guest international judge for the Alternative Varieties Wine Show this week. So I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to sit down and find out more about her. So please enjoy the episode. If you do, stick around to the end so you can find out how to get in touch with us. But until then, I'll see you on the other side. Sarah, thank you for making some time whilst we're both here in Mildura for the Alternative Varieties Wine Show, and welcome on the podcast.
Thank you.
I usually ask my guest at the start of each episode if they can remember if there was a particular experience they had with wine that possibly set them on the path to a career and passion for wine, or if it was a gradual thing.
No, it was. There was definitely a scales fall from the eyes moment where I realised that wine was a living thing and was capable of changing in bottle, and I suppose. In fact, I bought my partner a wine tasting course for a Christmas present, and I was brought up in a family where we didn't really do wine. My parents had the occasional bottle, but it certainly wasn't part of our family culture. And at university, I wasn't that into wine. I mean, probably Kim Chalmers would be very excited by the fact that I would have magnums of Lambrusco, but I think it's probably not the sort of Lambrusco that Kim aspires and Chalmers aspire to make.
Yeah, but Lambrusco...
But as a student, it was fruity and fun and very cheap.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not bad.
So I'm definitely not of the sort of, Oxbridge Wine Society school of wine writers, of which there are a lot in the UK.
Okay.
And so then I became a lawyer. I was a lawyer for 12 years. And so in that context, because my boss, I remember he really liked Cherouble Beaujolais, which is one of the less familiar ones. So I remember I sort of enjoyed that. And if we went for fancy dinners, he was a big fan of Pliny Morrichet, fortunately for me, so he introduced me to that. But I would not know anything about the domain or vintage or anything like that.
And it wasn't capturing you enough to kind of want to find out more. You were just like,
No.
you started to enjoy it more. And
I was really into the food, to be honest. That was my focus. And I'd always loved food. I loved cooking when I was younger. And my parents used to buy these Robert Carrier magazines, and I used to... they'd buy fillet steak and let me use the brandy in the cupboard to cook with and things like that. So that was my theatre. That was my enjoyment of the sensory world, if you like.
Sure.
So it was about food. And then because my partner, would say when I was cooking, oh, it's this herb or this spice, I bought her a wine tasting course for a Christmas present. And she said, well, look, why don't you come along as well? So I went along, and that was the scales fall from eyes moment.
Right, okay.
Because, first of all, we were tasting a number of different wines alongside each other. So all of a sudden it was like, oh, so there's all these different wines, because we would just buy Sainsbury's Southeastern Australian Chardonnay or, Chilean Red or something like that, massively generic wines. And all of a sudden I was tasting all these wines that I'd never come across before, comparing and contrasting, which I just think is the best way to learn. But obviously socially, you're not tasting lots of wines alongside each other. And I think lots of people stick with, they know what they like what they know, and you're sort of in that sort of circle, that vicious circle of, which is not so good. I think with wine, I think the fun in wine is to be adventurous. So that was real scales fall from eyes. And then the wine being a living thing really came out to me when I tasted, it was a Moulin Touché in 1986. So I suppose at that time, it was maybe 15 years old. And I just remember, wine ages and it develops and becomes really interesting in the bottle. And I had no idea about that. So that was the real sort of scales fall from eyes moment. So yeah,
but up to that point, you'd started to kind of change your sensory perception. Like you started to get interested in food, and presumably you were looking at different ingredients and how how they could combine and how they could change, and texture might have influenced things. And so I think it was only natural that you would start to discover wine and think about how that. How different elements of a wine, where it comes from, how it's made, how old it is, might have, changed the way you perceive the wine.
Yeah, you would, I suppose because of the interest in food, you've got a sort of library of vocabulary and understanding of flavours, flavour recognition. But I think the other thing, actually, being a lawyer, and because I was a litigator, it's all about disputes, court disputes, and you're having to get your head around something new, how a process works,
analysis,
how
interpretation,
so
how you can use language to conceive, to convey an idea.
Yeah, but I'm also just dead curious, so that innate curiosity, which I suppose took me to law and took me into that decision to be a litigator, where, I always love the beginning of a case because you'd be finding out something new and starting to investigate it. So I think that came into it as well as the sort of food side of it. So the food side was, if you like, the sensory side, and then the without wanting to sound too highfalutin about it, the law side was the more intellectual side of, how does this affect? How does oak affect it? How does where this grape is grown affect the taste of the wine? So all of that, there was that intellectual curiosity as well as that sensory appreciation.
And did you
colliding in a kind of wonderful way?
Did you taste a wine and it kind of moved you in a different way, and you kind of went, oh, what is it I'm connecting with? And you kind of almost reverse engineered and sort of would read up.
I love to do that. I love to do that. I mean, for me, and when I write about wine, I'm not a big fan of just writing out loads of tasting notes. I really want to put wine in context.
Yeah.
And communicate the context of wine, the people, the place, the food, the philosophy behind the wine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what, certainly for me, makes wine more exciting. And in my experience of presenting tastings, I think when you can latch onto that and talk about that, I think other people really can connect with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because in a way, it's not about you, saying, I know how to taste, and you may, perhaps you can learn to taste as well, and this is what I'm getting in this wine, so this is what you should be getting. Mm-hmm. It's more about, this is where this wine came from.
Sure. Was there
that's, I think, exciting, and that, certainly for me, that's what excites me about wine.
And that kind of investigative thing that influenced you kind of coming up with this moniker of the wine detective?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, what I used to say, I used to run some wine tasting courses when I first left Oddbins, which was my first wine job. And what I used to say about the wine detective was, a glass of wine is just full of clues, about what the grape variety is, where the grapes are grown, how old the wine is, and I do think in that way, that kind of forensic, if you like, approach, thinking about the clues in the glass. And again, I think that's, in my experience, people can really engage with that, and they start looking for those clues, and they become wine detectives.
And that empowers them to kind of unlock the potential to find out what wines that they like, what it is about wines that they connect with.
What you do, and what you do and don't like.
Yeah.
It's just as important what you don't like, because then it starts you thinking about what you do like.
Yeah. What was it that got you interested in food? Like, was it, did you, go and eat at reasonably good places? Where were you working? Were you in London?
Yeah, I worked in London, but I was born in Yorkshire, and
really. You do
not
have
my accent.
You do not have a Yorkshire accent.
Well, you see, if you had me say Bath or Brass, might have a Yorkshire temperament, James.
What do you call it? A Yorkshire kiss? Oh no, that's a Liverpool kiss. Sorry.
You're getting yourself into even hotter water now.
Yeah, I know. Oh, God.
Yorkshire, Liverpool.
I'll have lots of unsubscribes after this episode, I'm sure.
But no, I got into food when I was a kid, so well before I started work, and I guess that was because my dad loved cooking. Actually, my dad's from India originally, hence the surname Ahmed. Mm-hmm. And when he came over from Pakistan, he did his medical training, and then he was a ship doctor, so travelled around the world. And I suppose really enjoyed finding new food cultures in that context. But when he came to the UK, and he was working in hospitals, and hospital food was awful. So, and he actually didn't know how to cook at this stage, but had watched his mum a lot.
Sure.
And so he went to the. I'm surprised he wasn't chased out of the kitchens with a meat cleaver wielding chef, but he went to the chef and saw all these ingredients and looked at the ingredients that they had in the hospital kitchens and was like, well, this all looks pretty good stuff to me.
Yeah.
And he just said, look, can I take this and can I cook it myself?
Okay.
And so he sort of taught himself how to cook, and he was very passionate, about food.
Yeah.
And he would do a lot of the cooking at home.
Okay.
He would be home at lunchtime, and in the afternoon he might have to do some calls and things, but he would often cook dinner then. And when he picked us up from school, he'd always have gone to the bakers and got cakes and things when we came home from school. So there was a real love of food, in my family. And I always remember actually my family's love of food. Sometimes you're just in it and you don't really appreciate that there is this connection between you all.
Can't see the forest for the trees.
And I remember with my partner when I first took her home to meet my folks, and one of my sisters was there, who's also a big foodie. My mum made this really nice lunch, and then we all started talking about the last great food experience that we'd had, and because Mandy, my partner, was there. All of a sudden, I was going backwards and sort of seeing everyone from a kind of helicopter perspective and thinking, oh my God, we're really into our food. And I hadn't really, it was just how we were,
It takes an outsider's perspective to actually make you appreciate it and go, oh yeah, actually.
Yeah.
So do you think that had a big influence in terms of having quite a diverse palate for different foods, like coming from that subcontinent area, probably spices and that kind of influence might have influenced you to a certain extent.
I think it's
an appreciation for diversity as well.
Yeah, I think I certainly think it's part of it, and I think when I got into wine, I felt reasonably confident about talking about flavours and aromas, and in a way which, when I used to run wine tasting courses, I think I noticed that a lot of women were quite confident about talking about what flavours or aromas they were getting in a way that I don't think guys were. And I think also guys felt more under pressure to be able to name the wine region, and show knowledge rather than actually responding directly to what was in the glass. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of women also felt more confident about talking about flavours and aromas because, back then, I'm that old, a lot of women would have been the ones who were really, cooking and...
And so, looking at different ingredients, that kind of thing, and being confident
just being
with
at home
saying,
with that.
Well, that's lemon or that's coriander, that kind of thing. Okay. How did your parents or how did your, loved ones feel about you leaving a career in law to pursue one in wine?
Yeah, I mean, actually, for my parents, in a way, they were quite good about it in the sense that they they just kept quite quiet about it. It's sort of afterwards they talked about it when they could see that I was happy doing what I was doing, and I think that that made all the difference for them. And I think partly James, had sort of been through that loop before with them of coming out, and they reacted very badly to that. And it took them quite a while to just see that I was happy. So I think actually when it sounds bizarre, but when it came to wine, I think they thought, actually, Sarah knows who she is, and it made it easier for them in a way to just stand back and let me do what I was going to do.
They could see that, it probably would have been a real struggle to make the decision to walk away from what probably was, a reasonably, secure career in law to kind of take the risk of going to wine. Like they having, had the experience of you telling them, a pretty important part of who you are. Yeah. They would have gone straight away. Well, we know that Sarah's is telling us this. She's making this decision because it makes her happy. So. We can't disagree with her if that's what she wants to do. Then
I think they felt more sort of confident that I I know who I am, and I'd make the right call for me. Yeah, and and they knew that I'd been stressed in the job and that I didn't enjoy it. There were parts of it that I enjoyed, but fundamentally it didn't make me happy. And my mum says, it's something I didn't think about myself. She said, "You get bored easily," And I always remember reading an interview with an actor called Nigel Hawthorne, who said, I never wanted a comfortable life, but an interesting life. And I think that's how I feel actually. So my mum's comment about you get bored easily, it's not something actually that I think about myself, because I think I tend to be very sort of committed, loyal person. I invest in things and I hate going backwards. So I don't tend to think of myself as someone who flits around. Yeah. But actually, I do like learning. Sure. I like new things, and I think wine gives you a real opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I remember the day that I realised that you couldn't know everything about wine. And I thought a lot of people probably look at that and become quite depressed. And I think that's actually quite liberating. Yeah. You can always learn something new. Yeah. It's impossible to know everything. So I think that fuels you to just keep pushing forward, but also to know that, well, there's no harm, because you can never know everything. Everything's always changing as far as wine. So you made the decision to step away from law, and did you research about how you wanted to get into the wine industry, or how did the Oddbins opportunity kind of present itself?
Yeah, I'd love to say that I was hugely strategic person, but I'm not at all. And I think part of that move from law to wine is because I can do head stuff, but really I'm a heart person.
Sure.
And I tend to, do things, and it comes from the heart rather than the head. So it wasn't wildly strategic, James. But when I had to give a year's notice from my law job.
A year?
Yeah, because I was an equity partner. So.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So, and at that point, I didn't know that I was going to go into wine. I knew that I was really excited by it, and I was going to more tastings and things. And because I had a year off, I thought, I've got a chance to make a really good decision here, you know. And so I went to a life coach who, basically got me to the point which was pulled right from the back of my head this idea which, just seems silly. I was totally dismissive of it. I'd love to work in mine, but I was 100% dismissive of it. Thought that's silly. But she brought that to the forefront and said, you can always go back to law. So then I started, I bought the trade magazine, Harper's Wine Spirit Weekly, and looked at the jobs in the back of that just to get an idea of what jobs were available. And I'd started going to wine tastings after the tasting course, the original tasting course that I'd bought for Mandy. I went on that company's next, advanced tasting course or something, and I started going to Oddbins Fine Wine in Farringdon in the city, which is the original Oddbins store, very big store, very atmospheric store under Holborn Viaduct. And I met the fine wine manager there, who I got on very well with, and he used to do these monthly tastings, and I used to go along to those. And I just like the Oddbins' very informal approach. I think it really appealed to me as well, having, been a lawyer, and, lots of people I think would have thought, Sarah's going to go and work for Berry Brothers and Rudd, or one of these very sort of pucker wine merchants. But it wasn't how I felt about wine at all. I really loved the sort of Oddbins back in the day. So this would have been 99, 98, 2000. Just lack of snobbery around wine and a sense of adventure around wine.
Yeah.
So I went on more tastings, and then got to know the fine wine manager, and I decided Oddbins actually was a good place to start, because I didn't know a lot about wine. I really didn't. I'd maybe been to, I don't know, probably no more than 20, 30 wine tastings by then, but I was just excited by it and reading books about it. And I thought, this is great, because I can go and work for Oddbins just on the shop floor, and it won't be pressured. I'd been working in this very pressured environment. I was a partner quite early on, and I'd worked in a really big city firm doing crazy hours before that. I was a partner in a firm that had a big commitment to legal aid, so it was a completely different culture. But it was still stressful in a different way. So I think I really enjoyed just giving myself time to relax and just put myself in an environment where I could learn. And I knew that I would learn from the people around me in Oddbins.
Yeah.
And I suppose Colin, the fine wine manager there, was a bit of a mentor. And also that Oddbins would put you through the Wine and Spirit Education Trust exam. So I'd have this sort of formal training, as it were, and build up some knowledge blocks fairly logically that way, but also have this input from the guys that I worked with in the store, because back then everyone who worked in Oddbins, they were complete wine nuts, and there was this incredible passion about wine, and everyone was opening wines to taste, and it was really great. It worked really well for me.
I could imagine that it would have been pretty liberating to kind of go into an environment where you had, almost all your responsibility taken away, and you can kind of, it's a clean slate, and you are learning. And I think that probably would have been quite comforting, considering that you'd stepped away from, something that you were very familiar with and had worked many years at, to something totally new.
Yeah.
Were you influenced by wines from anywhere in particular in those early days? Did you find yourself connecting with wines from a particular country more than others?
Definitely Australia. I mean, I guess because at that time, anyway, Australian wines were immensely popular. And in Oddbins, they had an amazing selection of Australian wines. I mean, incredible. I mean, there was almost a whole area in the store, in the main store, that was, I reckon we probably had about 80 different Australian wines in the main store. And then in the fine wine store, Australia was an important part of the fine wine store, which, is again part of that Oddbins being unstuffy. And I can remember, I think it would probably one of the tastings that I went to before I left the law. In fact, it definitely would have been, because I wouldn't have spent that much money. And I went to a tasting, and I bought a case of Hegis Viodier and a case of Catnook Prodigy, the 97, I remember, which lasted very well. I only had the last bottle about 3 years ago. So definitely Australia.
Yeah.
And because of how everyone was in the store at that time as well, in Oddbins, everyone was really passionate about Australian wines.
Well, certainly
and it's
before
what we were all drawn to. You know?
It was certainly before the sort of the bubble burst.
Yeah.
For Australian wine. Obviously, the financial crisis had a big effect on the Australian wine and the export markets. Did you really relish the opportunity to be able to talk with customers, general public, and kind of learn firsthand what people were interested in knowing about, learning, and then talking with your colleagues and then your mentors as well? Did you kind of really take advantage of that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess especially when I then became fine wine manager in that store.
Yeah.
So the last 2 years that I was at Oddbins, I was the fine wine manager, and I set up an email database of customers, and I had regular tastings, and I took them to restaurants, and I really enjoyed building up a relationship with the customers and understanding what kind of wines they liked, developing that trust, which I think is really exciting, actually, when, in a way, as now writing about wine, and especially stuff that's on my website, that's stuff that really excites me, and so people who know me and go, oh, if Sarah likes it, then it's worth tasting that.
Yeah, okay.
Or if, Sarah describes it in this way, then that's a wine I'm going to like. And, when I worked in Oddbins, and especially when I was managing the fine wine store, I think it was really enjoyable to develop that relationship where, you'd email someone or phone them and go, I've just got this in, I think you'd really love it.
Yeah.
And you're taking people on the adventure.
Yeah.
The adventure that excites you, come on this ride with me,
Yeah.
So a lot of fun in that, and I really enjoy that about presenting tastings as well. And in some ways, it's much more rewarding than writing, because a lot of writing that you do, the tyranny of the word count, which I find immensely frustrating, because I could just go on and on and on sharing my knowledge and enthusiasm, and it's they're pretty tight word counts. The other great thing about doing tastings is that you get immediate feedback.
Absolutely.
And you're really you're interacting, and you really feel that you can really see where you're making a difference to people's appreciation of wine.
It's funny, you mentioned Nigel Hawthorne before, I think a Shakespearean actor.
Yeah, he did,
and a lot of those, the stage actors sort of talk about loving the theatre because they can see the audience and they can hear them reacting, and they love that immediate feedback. Whereas when they're on television or film, they're not able to, unless they go and sit in a theatre with an audience, they don't know what the audience might be reacting to. So you, whilst working for Oddbins, you studied, you did Wesset. And no doubt you would have had the opportunity to also travel. Did you, get out to wine regions, start to visit producers? You got around and you started to connect with producers as well?
Yeah, so I did my first sort of winery experience, I think, in the second year that I was at Oddbins. So I did vintage for 2 weeks at Torres in Catalonia, which was funny, because I can remember on the first day just being stepped through the winemaking process, and it totally reminded me of my first glamorous overseas project as a lawyer when I worked in a city firm, which was a sewage treatment plant in Dubai that had gone wrong, and I had to understand the whole process and go through each individual step, and it was funny. Sort of, I just remember it going through, flicking through my head then, this same experience, but how much more enjoyable it was. It was wine in a beautiful place and much nicer smells.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I did that, and with the Wine and Spirit Education Trust exams, I suppose because I'm a spotty lawyer, and also because I'd made this massive change, and I really wanted to make it work. I was really very motivated. So I'd love to say I was a natural genius at passing these exams and things, but I worked really hard. I studied. That's I enjoy that. I enjoy learning. So I won quite a lot of bursaries and things, and got sort of study trips that way. So I went to Chile, visited the Loire quite a bit, and then for the diploma, I was the top graduate, which was incredibly lucky because it was in 2003. Which was the year when it was the last year of the old style diploma, which meant if you were the top graduate, you got this trophy that Jancis Robinson had won and other famous people in wine. So that was nice for profile. And then you got all these bursaries. So I got this bursary which enabled me to go to South Africa and the Loire to focus on Chenin Blanc. Mm-hmm. So I probably spent about 8 weeks on that. Wow. Which gave me my first opportunity to write about wine. And remember, I'm coming from this background of being an expert as a lawyer, particularly in the city firm, very specialist. So for me, I felt I could write about that because I'd spent a lot of time, probably a lot more time than lots of people, studying Chenin Blanc. So I had 2 or 3 pieces that I wrote, my first paid pieces, came out of that. And I had a study trip to Portugal for a week. And in Oddbins, we didn't have very many Portuguese wines at all, and didn't have very much exposure to them. But I had, for the exams, I'd sort of gone along to the annual Portugal tasting in London and all that sort of thing. But I really didn't know much about them. And going on that study trip, if you're curious, about wine, which I am, all these different native grape varieties, this long, skinny country, and lots of changes, as you travel down the country, then, you can't help but fall in love with Portuguese wine, really. Mm. So
that was where you first sort of started to fall in love with Portuguese wine as well?
Yeah. And then, I guess because of the diploma and because of, working in Oddbins, Wine Australia asked me to go out to Australia in 2004. And that was my first trip to Australia. And it was this crazy 2.5 weeks of, starting in Western Australia, then going to South Australia, then going to Victoria, then going to Tasmania, then going to New South Wales, and going to all the sort of key wine regions. Wow. So it was a real roller coaster ride, but gave me this fantastic overview. And when I came back from that, I'd sort of mentioned to the Wine Australia crew that I was planning to leave Oddbins and go freelance and do tastings and writing, and they said, "Oh, do you want to present tastings for us?" Because someone that they used to employ to do tastings, she was ill, unfortunately, and so they asked me if I would do these tastings up and down the country for wine societies and consumer groups. So that also really kind of reinforced my knowledge of Australian wine, and I was regularly tasting a lot of Australian wine doing that. Yeah. So everything happened. I think your original question was basically, so how did you forge your path in wine? So it all happened like really, super organically, rather than some massive master plan. Mm.
As far as your writing, particularly as you approached, becoming independent or freelance, how did you kind of approach how you wanted to write, like what you wanted to say, not having studied journalism or I'm guessing not really creative writing or anything like that. You
No,
would have done,
I mean,
a lot of legal writing.
Hitherto,
Yeah.
had to scratch those.
Yeah.
And I was very wordy as well.
Sure.
Because lawyers, you're paid by, your time. So,
of course.
we're going to spend a lot of time over things.
Big documents. Lots of sub-clauses.
Exactly. So, well, I guess...
you said you were quite swotty as far as your particularly with the wine. I'm assuming you did a lot of reading. Did you have influences as far as there's some of the stuff you were reading about wine, and did that kind of possibly play into how you wanted to write about wine?
Gosh, I'm trying to think really about that. I suppose. I suppose my first writing in a way was writing a monthly newsletter when I worked in Oddbins. I'd set up all these email customer base. So that's when I first started writing. So that was very just me chatting to my customers. And to a degree, I suppose I carried on doing that with the Wine Detector. But then, actually, do you know what? If I'm completely honest, I would say that when I started writing for magazines, I found it really challenging.
Sure.
I found it really tough because I sort of felt that I had to be the expert. And so it wasn't me just chatting to people.
And also, with the Oddbins writing and with the Wine Detective, you sort of had your audience. They knew your voice. And so you felt like it was, you were connecting with them. Whereas, when you're writing for someone else, you have to kind of... take that out of it, and it's
not in the first person.
Me. It's not about necessarily, me talking to you. It's about I'm talking about a particular topic.
Yeah. So I suppose because of that, and this comes back to being swotty, I suppose, and also because my first paid writing came out of this, actually a huge luxury of being able to spend, several weeks in the Loire and in South Africa, meeting Chenin Blanc producers, tasting lots of Chenin Blanc. I did these big questionnaires and everything. And, I suppose being a lawyer, I'm good at marshalling information and, going through it. So that will help process it. So I suppose I wrote in quite probably a relatively formal but informed style. I felt it was very important that I really knew my stuff.
Confidence. You talked about confidence before. You wanted to sort of have a confidence in what you wanted.
That would be important to me. I'm not a seat of the pants person. I never have been.
Okay.
So I suppose that approach definitely would have informed my writing style. I think also, and maybe this comes back a little bit to being, an advocate, if you like, for clients as a litigator about telling their story, which does take you out of it. So really getting lots of first-hand information and reporting it, which I suppose sometimes I sort of think you can struggle a little bit getting your own opinion across. I mean, some writers, and sometimes I look at them enviously and think, I wish I was better at really, asserting an opinion or whatever. And I think I do it sort of in a reading between the lines way, because of what I choose to write about, and what I suppose how I report it, and how you marshal information. So I suppose how would I describe my style? I describe my style as wanting to get the stories out there.
Okay.
The stories of the producer, the stories of the region, rather than, it being about me. I'm very drawn to, inverted commas, underdogs. So I think the sort of enjoyment around Portugal is about wanting to share and excite people about this country whose wines I think are really underrated and below the radar. And Australia, it sounds a weird thing to say that about Australia, but I think although Australia's, had, number one position since 2004 in the UK and been very popular with commodity wines, I think it has struggled much more with premium and certainly fine wines. But that's the environment that I've always worked in with Australian wines.
Has a perception for being a bit one-dimensional.
Yeah, so championing that
Yeah.
as, that's something that definitely informs what draws me to a story or a wine region or a wine or a producer. And I suppose that also ties in with wanting to be learning and uncovering new trends. So, and I think I also have a bit of a sort of skepticism, I think a healthy skepticism about, the really famous regions, the Bordeaux and Burgundy, although obviously managing a fine wine store, those were very important. But in the Oddbins scheme of things, there was a lot of other things that were very exciting. And I would know that you'd get a lot of customers come in who would say, I've got £100 to spend on a bottle of wine. And at that time, £100 would buy you a bottle of first growth Bordeaux.
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, is it to drink now or is it to, and they go, no, because if it's to drink now, maybe you would like to maybe this Pomerol, it's £60, this Chateau Figeac, maybe this is better. No, I want to spend £100, and just realising it wasn't about the wine. It was about, spending a certain amount of money and the status, and that doesn't attract me.
Yeah.
That's not what draws me to wine, and it's not the sort of story that I want to tell. I don't want to reinforce, if you like, that status and wealth. I want to say, hang on, these things
they're not really connected.
Deserve attention.
Yeah.
These things are amazing.
Yeah.
Have a look at this. Don't look at that. Look at this. So I suppose, choosing what I choose to write about and how I choose to write about it is really tapping into that personal opinion of mine. So now I've decided I am very opinionated after all.
No, but I think I agree with you. Well, at least me personally, I get a bit bored of hearing the same sort of things all the time, and if I feel that people aren't necessarily talking about something enough, I want to find out why, and I want to find the charm in something, and so that's why I have particular interest in certain styles of wines. I like alternative varieties. I like wines from not really well-known regions of Italy. I personally love the wines of Portugal, particularly in terms of the table wines. I think that there is much more pleasure and reward in not just getting an opportunity to talk about those kind of things, but also when you have someone connect with it and say, I would never have thought of, buying a bottle of, red wine from the Dow region of Portugal. Yeah. I'd never heard of it before. I've never heard of these grapes, but I enjoyed it so much more because your passion and your ability to communicate and put it in context was so much more enjoyable for me rather than reading another bland tasting note or looking at a point score.
Yeah.
How did you go from becoming freelance to you've contributed to some of the greatest wine publications and reference guides in the world. How did you get those opportunities moving forward with your career in the last 10 plus years?
How did those opportunities come about? Again, I'd love to say it was my great strategic master plan, but it wasn't. I think something I noticed about my law career and my wine career is that if you're really passionate about something, it really shines through. And I think, although, I was a good lawyer, but I was successful within that, I didn't really feel successful. I didn't enjoy that inverted commas success. And in wine, it's been very different. And so I think people can see that and respond to that. So I guess my in to writing those texts, writing for those reference books, The World Atlas of Wine and Hugh Johnson Pocket Wine and Oxford Companion to Wine, is because really early on, like I think it was the year after I left Oddbins, and I think it came back to the diploma and being the top graduate on the diploma, which I worked very hard for it, but equally, I could have been second or third. I might not have been, that could easily have happened, but I was lucky. I did put the work in, but I was lucky still. And I think probably because of that, and because someone who used to be married to, she was married to a buyer at Oddbins, who's no longer a buyer at Oddbins, that was the used to bit. She was editing, was temporary managing editor on the World Atlas of Wine, the 6th edition. And so she suggested me for doing the initial research on it. And Jancis Robinson approved that. And, if you have Jancis Robinson's approval, that's pretty handy.
Yeah.
So I have a lot to thank Jancis for approving, and going yes, and giving me that break.
Yeah.
Or, I haven't met her lots of times or whatever, but I suppose there was a certain trust came from how I'd performed, and then because I performed well on that, I was asked to do Hugh Johnson Pocket Wine and contribute on Portugal. And to be honest, when I was asked to do that, I didn't know very much about Portugal at all. And I can remember having a conversation, with my partner and going, I don't think I can do this, because I just don't know enough about Portugal. And Amanda rather brilliantly said to me, but you know what? If you take that on, you will study it and you will find out a lot about Portugal. And, the person who stopped doing it is the person who'd written books on Portugal before, and he was going off and establishing his own winery. And there weren't many people who knew much about Portugal. So she said, they'll just give it to someone else who doesn't know much about Portugal, but at least you will...
Position that you
at
are,
least you will be conscientious about it, and you will get stuck in. So that's what happened.
Yeah.
And then the Oxford Companion. So all then, stemmed from that, really.
Yeah. Now you've also been very involved with Wine Show, with judging, and you've judged around the world. How have you approached the opportunity to judge, and what do you personally try to get out of the experiences that you have judging?
I mean, the first thing that I like to do is I like to come to the region and spend some time in the region.
Yeah.
And not just in a room tasting a lot of wines every day, because I don't find that of itself very exciting. So to have some context, the place, the people, the culture, the local food, I think is really important, and also to get to know the people. And then in the wine show process itself, obviously you're learning about the wines of a region or a style, but also it's the conversations with the other judges and the connections that you make.
Sure.
In the show, and just learning an awful lot, especially in Australia, because you're judging with winemakers, a lot of winemakers, and I'm not a winemaker, and I'm not very scientific. I know how I feel about wine, but for me it's really fascinating to have that wine insight into a winemaker's perspective. So I find that really valuable. And also I think it's interesting seeing the different approaches at different wine shows by the chair, by the different team leaders. So I think there's lots to learn. It's a fantastic learning opportunity. It's not just about dishing out, your judgment of Solomon on the wines. It's that's not the most important thing for me. Hopefully I'm doing a good job on it, but the most important thing is, it's an immense learning opportunity.
Yeah. Now, of course, you're here as the the international
Yeah.
guest judge for the Australian Alternative Varieties Wine Show. You, of course, are very across Australian wine and Portuguese wine. Are you excited to kind of look at what's happening in Australia, particularly in the context of alternative varieties? Are you looking forward to tasting lots of new things this week?
Yeah, I mean, I was gobsmacked, I think is fair to say is the word, that there are 102 different varieties in the show. I mean, I'm pretty across Australia, certainly in the UK. I hadn't got a Scooby. There were, that many varieties being planted and producing wine in Australia. So no, I think, I'm really looking forward to finding out more. And I guess, last year, 21st Century Vino, the event was in Melbourne, and then came to London. And that was my big updating, really, on alternative grape varieties, because Max Allen had come out to London, I think it was about several years ago, to show some alternative variety wines. And I remember sort of thinking, they didn't excite me so much. They seemed like red wines, white wines, made in an Australian style. And he showed them alongside examples from Europe, and I just thought, and they're a lot more expensive than the European ones. I just don't see what this is about. I don't get it. And I think what's really changed for me in the last few years, and 21st Century Vino, I think, really took it a stage further. But I'd already picked up that all of a sudden alternative grape varieties seem to be a lightning rod for really pushing the boundaries with winemaking styles. And it was almost as if producers were saying, we've got this new variety, we can just wipe the slate clean in terms of how we go about making wine, and just take a different approach, use more solids, use natural yeasts, reduce sulfur levels, but I guess principally focus a bit more on acid and tannin, on the bones of a wine, the structure of a wine, and not just the fruit, which I think Australia, you maybe don't have to work so hard to get that fruit. No. So for me, that's been the real game changer with alternative varieties. And when 21st Century Vino came to London last year, I just think it was, for a lot of UK press and trade, I think they were really surprised by actually how far Australians have pushed it and how successfully they've pushed it with alternative grape varieties. And I think, something that I've noticed anyway, leaving aside alternative grape varieties, is because I come to Australia regularly, I taste a lot of wines that never make it to the UK, and some might be even just cellar door wines that are single vineyard wines, and there are still lingering sort of stereotypes in the UK about Australian wines all being multi-regional blends, or certainly not a great deal of single vineyard wines or terroir. But I've known for a long time coming over here that there are a lot of single vineyard wines knocking around, and single vineyard wines which deserve single vineyard on the label.
Sure.
The terroir is relevant. So I think one of the huge issues is that there are some not very exciting buying decisions in the UK. A lot of conservatism. So we haven't been seeing what's been going on, and I've been quite privileged in having the opportunities to come over here, but I hadn't really picked up on that alternative varietal trend and how successful those wines have become until last year at the 21st Century Vino tasting.
Yeah, and as evidenced by the fact that there are over 700 entries, record-breaking this year, it really does show you that the industry, across the board, from very small producers to some very large producers, are all investing in varying levels in the alternative varieties. So it's certainly exciting for me. I'm relish the opportunity to taste and ask questions, hopefully. But I'm really interested to see what you think at the end of this week.
Yeah.
Sarah, I wanted to thank you very much for making some time. It really has been fascinating finding out more about your journey. Have you got any upcoming projects or anything you'd like to share with the listeners? Or, you're starting to run some tours as well.
Yep. So, Arblaster and Clark, I ran a tour for them in Australia in March, in South Australia and in Victoria.
Yes.
And the plan is to do another tour in 2018. They want to do it every other year. So I think the plan next time, I'm certainly pushing for Victoria and Tasmania, so a slightly different diet, more of a focus on cool climate regions.
Oh, you can still do some reasonably
hopefully
warm
get
climates in
some
Victoria.
alternative grape varieties in the equation as well.
Yep.
And also running some tours to Portugal. So
great.
So yeah.
Fantastic.
And I think, that again, because then you have the chance to share with people the place, the people, and the culture, not just trying to lift it off the page from your experience, but actually they get that first-hand experience. And I just think, especially in Australia, actually, people love the lifestyle here. It really makes a big difference when people come here, I think.
We're pretty welcoming people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your website and social media accounts, if you'd like people to follow you?
Yeah, thewinedetective.co.uk is my website. On Twitter, my Twitter handle is @SarahWine. Please do follow.
Fantastic. Well,
thank you. Thanks, James.
And my sincerest thanks again to Sarah for making some time while she's here in Mildura. It was really great to learn a bit more about her, and I hope you guys did enjoy the episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please let us both know. You can find me on social media on Instagram and Twitter. I'm @IntrepidWino, and the podcast can also be found on Twitter the Vincast. You can find my Facebook page and hit that like button, and you can see some of the pictures and links and other stuff that I post on there. Why not come to my YouTube channel, Intrepid Wino, one word. I will be posting some video footage of the proceedings of the wine show here in Mildura. I'm really excited to be able to share that experience, and check out some of the other videos that I've posted on there as well. You can find the podcast on any number of different podcast hosting apps, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Player FM. Subscribe to the podcast so that you can get the newest episode as soon as it becomes available, and you'll also be able to get access to the full back catalogue, all 106 previous episodes of the show. I'd love for you to come and visit me at intrepidwino.com. Please do get in touch. You can find me at thevincast@gmail.com, because I'd love to hear from you. But looking forward to hearing what people thought of this week's episode, and again, hopefully get you on a future episode. But until next time, bye.